They told me there was no room for me at my own granddaughter's party. I stood there outside that brightly lit event mansion, holding the gift I had so lovingly selected over the weeks, my hands shaking so badly. I almost dropped the wrapped box onto the marble floor of the entryway. The sound of music and laughter came from inside like waves that hit me repeatedly, so loud, so vibrant, so full of life and joy, as if I were just an invisible ghost waiting on the doorstep. I could see through the enormous glass windows, the colorful lights twinkling in cheerful patterns, the pink and gold balloons decorating every corner of the luxurious ballroom, the tables covered with shiny satin tablecloths, and I knew that inside everyone was celebrating my dear Emily's 15th birthday. All her friends, all her family, all the important people in her life. Everyone, absolutely everyone except me. My daughter-in-law. Jennifer opened the front door just a crack, just enough for me to see her perfectly. Matte-up face with gold eyeshadow and red lipstick, and her expression of utter disdain that she didn't even try to hide. She didn't even feign cordiality this time. She simply looked me up and down, assessing my navy blue dress I'd bought especially. For this occasion, my hair I'd spent an hour getting done at the salon, my understated but elegant jewelry, and then she said in an icy voice that the guest list had been closed for weeks, that there was absolutely no way I could fit in there, and that it would be much better for everyone if I simply left before causing an embarrassing scene. 'Cause it's seen me, the woman who practically raised that little girl for the first 5 years of her life, who spent countless nights awake, rocking her when she had terrible colic, who taught her first words with infinite patience, who was present for every milestone of her childhood until exactly 3 years ago, when everything began to crumble like a house of cards. There I was being treated like an unwelcome intruder, like a pushy saleswoman, like someone who had no right to be there at the door of the house that, ironically, had been purchased with my money, registered in my name, and from which they had been evicted by court order. But they didn't yet know what I knew. No one but me and my lawyer knew the full truth about that property and everything that had happened behind the scenes. If you've made it this far in this story, you probably know that families aren't always the perfect portrait we see in television commercials. Right here, I share real stories from real people facing situations that often seem impossible to overcome. These are stories that will move you, make you reflect deeply on your own family relationships, and perhaps even help you better understand the complex dynamics that exist within each family. Subscribe to the channel and be part of this community, where every story matters, where you're always welcome to share your experiences, and where together we can learn that we are not alone in our struggles. Now join me as I tell you all the details of how I arrived at that door holding a rejected gift, and how this devastating experience ended up transforming me into a completely different person. My story with Jennifer and Robert began over 15 years ago, when my son finally introduced me to the woman he claimed was the love of his life. I remember that dinner at an Italian restaurant in downtown Atlanta, like it was yesterday, with candles on the tables and soft music playing in the background. Jennifer arrived wearing a delicate floral dress, her dark hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, and a warm smile that seemed genuine. She hugged me as if she'd known me for years, saying she'd heard wonderful things about me, that she was eager to have me as part of the family. Robert was radiant, holding her hand across the table, looking at her with that sparkle in his eyes that only true love can create. I was so happy for him. After his father abandoned us when he was just 5, I raised Robert alone, working 2 jobs to ensure he had everything he needed. I watched him grow into a good, responsible, hardworking man. Seeing him so in love, so happy, was everything a mother could wish for. That night, as we ate delicious pasta and drank red wine, Jennifer told me about her childhood in a large, boisterous Latino family, about how she'd always dreamed of having her own small, close-knit family. She asked questions about me, about my life, about what it was like raising Robert alone. She seemed genuinely interested, genuinely caring. When we said goodbye that night, she hugged me again and whispered in my ear that she was happy to finally have a real mother since hers had passed away when she was a teenager. My heart completely melted. I thought I'd gained not just a daughter-in-law, but a daughter. In the months following that dinner, our relationship blossomed beautifully. Jennifer called me at least 3 times a week just to chat, to ask for advice on random things, to tell me about her day. Sometimes we'd go to lunch together, just the two of us, and she'd share her dreams for the future with Robert. She'd say she wanted children soon, that she wanted to build a strong and loving family, that she wanted me to be a very present grandmother in her grandchildren's lives. I felt included, valued, needed. After years of living alone following the death of my husband Harold from a sudden heart attack, having that family connection again filled a huge void I hadn't even known existed. Robert and Jennifer were married in a beautiful ceremony in June 2008. It was a small but elegant wedding in a historic garden with about 70 guests. Jennifer looked stunning in a simple yet sophisticated wedding dress, and Robert couldn't stop smiling. During the reception, Jennifer made sure to include me in everything. She introduced me to all her relatives as her wonderful mother-in-law, and invited me to dance with her and Robert to a special song they'd chosen for the family. In her speech at dinner, she specifically mentioned how grateful she was to have me in her life, how much she admired the way I'd raised Robert alone, and how she hoped I would be a constant presence in the family they were building. I cried during that speech. Tears of pure happiness. It felt like finally, after so many years of loneliness and sacrifice, I had a complete family again. Their honeymoon was in the Caribbean, 2 weeks at an all-inclusive resort. While they were away, I took care of the small apartment they'd rented, watering the plants, picking up the mail, and keeping the fridge stocked with fresh food for when they returned. When they returned, tanned and happy, they thanked me profusely and said it was wonderful to have someone so trustworthy taking care of things. A few months after their honeymoon, Jennifer called me crying with joy. She was pregnant. I screamed with joy on the phone immediately, starting planning a baby shower, researching newborn essentials, and imagining what it would be like to hold my first grandchild in my arms. Robert called me soon after to confirm the news, his voice brimming with pride and emotion. He said they couldn't wait for me to meet the baby, that they knew I would be the best grandmother in the entire world. Throughout the pregnancy, I was there every step of the way. I went to every important doctor's appointment my schedule allowed, held Jennifer's hand during the ultrasound, where we discovered it was a girl, helped decorate the baby's small room in their apartment with delicate, starry wallpaper and a vintage white dresser I found in an antique shop. I organized the baby shower, invited her friends and mine, and ordered a 3-tiered cake decorated with pink sugar slippers. I spent over $3,000 on that event alone, but I saw it as an investment in my family's happiness. Jennifer seemed genuinely touched by all the effort. She hugged me tearfully at the end of the party, saying she'd never had anyone care so much about her. Emily was born on a cold March morning in 2009, weighing 7 pounds 200 grams, with a mop of dark hair and eyes that promised to be as large and expressive as her mother's. I was in the hospital waiting room when Robert came out to tell me the news, his face transformed by a joy I'd never seen before. He led me to the room where Jennifer lay, exhausted but radiant, holding that little miracle wrapped in a pink hospital blanket. When Jennifer first placed Emily in my arms, I felt like my heart would burst with love. That perfect little face, those tiny fingers gripping my finger with surprising strength, that unmistakable newborn smell. I promised right then and there, looking into those closed eyes, that I would do everything in my power to ensure that child had the best life possible. For the first few months after Emily's birth, I practically lived in their apartment. Jennifer was overwhelmed, as most first-time mothers are. Emily had terrible colic that made her cry for hours at a time, especially at night. Robert had to work and couldn't afford to lose sleep every night, so I volunteered to help. I spent countless late nights pacing the living room with Emily in my arms, rocking her gently while singing lullabies I used to sing to Robert when he was a baby. I changed thousands of diapers, gave hundreds of bottles, and learned how to prepare special lactose-free formula when we discovered she was lactose intolerant. Jennifer always said she couldn't survive without my help, that I was a gift from God to her. During those early years, I spent significant amounts on Emily without a second thought. I bought her clothes every week because babies grow so fast. I filled her room with educational toys, colorful books, and stuffed animals. When Emily turned 1, I gave her an imported tricycle that cost $400. For her second birthday, it was a 3-story wooden dollhouse that cost $1,200. I simply couldn't resist when I saw something I thought she would like. Seeing her little face light up when she received a new gift, hearing her giggles, feeling her little arms hug me with all the strength a small child has. That was more valuable than any amount of money. Robert sometimes commented that I was spending too much, but always in a lighthearted tone, never as a serious criticism. He said I was spoiling his granddaughter, but always with a smile on his face. Jennifer never complained about the gifts. In fact, sometimes she'd even suggest things Emily needed or wanted, and I'd rush to buy them. When Emily was 3, Robert and Jennifer began serious discussions about moving to a bigger house. Their twelve-bedroom apartment was becoming too cramped. Emily was growing and needed more space to play. They wanted a yard where she could run free, a safe neighborhood with good schools, a place she could truly call home. The problem was money. Robert worked as a sales manager at a tech company and earned a reasonable salary around $70,000 a year, but it wasn't enough to put a down payment on a decent house in the neighborhoods they wanted. Jennifer had stopped working when Emily was born and hadn't returned yet, so they relied solely on his income. I had just sold my old house where I'd raised Robert. It was a 3-bedroom house in an older Atlanta neighborhood, nothing luxurious but full of memories. I sold it for $320,000, and after paying fees and commissions, I was left with about $295,000 net. I was living in a smaller, more practical rental apartment, perfect for a single woman who didn't need so much space. When Robert casually mentioned over Sunday lunch that they were looking at houses but didn't have enough down payment, my mother and grandmother's heart didn't hesitate. I immediately offered financial help. I said I could put up the full down payment if they found the right house, and that they could pay me back over the years, no pressure, no interest, on their own time. Robert initially refused, saying he couldn't accept such a large sum, that it was his responsibility to provide for the family. But I insisted. I explained that I had the money available, that I wasn't using it for anything specific, and that investing in their and Emily's future was exactly what I wanted to do with it. Jennifer, who was present during that conversation, was silent for a long moment, processing the offer. Then her eyes filled with tears, and she stood up to hug me tightly, telling me I was the best mother-in-law anyone could have, that this would completely change their lives. We agreed that they would look for houses the following weekend, and that when they found something suitable, we would discuss the financial details again. The search for the perfect home took about 2 months. They wanted something special, something worth the investment I was making. We visited dozens of properties together. Houses too small, houses too old and in need of major renovations, houses in unsuitable neighborhoods, houses beyond their budget, even with my help with the down payment. Until Jennifer found this mansion in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's most prestigious neighborhoods. It was a stunning property. 5 spacious bedrooms, 4 full bathrooms with marble finishes. A huge gourmet kitchen with a center island and Topothelin stainless steel appliances, a double height. Living room with a stone fireplace, a formal dining room that could easily seat 12, an office with built-in wood shelving, and even a spare bedroom downstairs that could be used for guests. The outdoor area was equally impressive. A heated pool with a surrounding wood deck, a meticulously landscaped garden with flowers of every color, a covered barbecue area with a brick barbecue and a lawn so green and perfect it looked like a carpet. The garage had room for 3 cars. The entire house was just over 400 square meters in size. The price was $900,000. It was much more expensive than I imagined they would be looking for, but when I saw the sparkle in Jennifer's eyes as she toured each room and the look of wonder on Robert's face, I knew this was their dream home. Emily, just 3 years old, ran through the empty rooms, squealing with joy, her voice echoing off the spotless white walls. She was already imagining which room would be hers, where she would put her toys, where she would play in the garden. We sat down with the real estate agent that same afternoon to discuss the numbers. With my excellent credit history and the significant down payment I was willing to make the bank, Celia approved a loan for the remaining amount. But here's the crucial part that would later become the center of the entire conflict. My lawyer, a wise man named Richard Morrison, who had handled my legal affairs for over 20 years, insisted that the property be registered in my name. His logic was simple and sound. I was investing a huge amount of money, $250,000 to be exact, which represented the majority of my life savings. If something went wrong, if Robert and Jennifer divorced, if they couldn't pay the mortgage, if any of dozens of unforeseen events occurred, I needed legal protection for my investment. Richard suggested we keep the property in my name until Robert and Jennifer fully reimbursed me for the down payment, at which point we would transfer the deed to their name. It made perfect sense to me. I explained all of this to Robert and Jennifer in a formal meeting at Richard's office where he detailed all the legal aspects of the arrangement. Robert read the documents, carefully asked a few questions about deadlines and expectations, and then agreed that it seemed fair. He signed the papers without hesitation, acknowledging that the house would be registered in my name as collateral for the family loan I was taking out. Jennifer also signed, although she read the documents more quickly and seemed less interested in the legal details. She was more focused on when we could close on the purchase and begin moving in. The closing process took 6 weeks. During that time, Jennifer spent hours and hours planning how she would decorate each room. She created mood boards with clippings from home decor magazines, researched furniture online, and made endless lists of things they would need to buy. I was completely involved in the process, offering opinions when she asked, and most importantly, offering more money, because it quickly became clear that furnishing a house that size wouldn't be cheap. They had furniture from the small apartment, of course, but it wasn't nearly enough. Their dining table could seat 4, but the formal dining space in the new house needed a table for at least 8. Their existing sofa would look ridiculous in the huge living room. The extra bedrooms were completely empty. Without much thought, I offered to pay for the initial furnishings. After all, I figured what good was a beautiful home? There wasn't enough furniture to fill the space. Jennifer and I visited several high-end furniture stores in Atlanta together. We chose a solid wood dining table with 8 upholstered chairs costing $4,500. A sofa set for the living room, including a 3-seater sofa, a love seat, and 2 armchairs, all in cream colored. Genuine leather cost $8,700. A king-size bed for the master bedroom with an upholstered headboard and 2 nightstands, costing together $3,200. For Emily's room, we created a true princess bedroom. A white canopy bed decorated with pale pink voile curtains cost $1,800. A tall dresser and a desk with a matching chair cost $2,100. Imported wallpaper with a delicate pattern of castles and princesses cost $900 just for the wallpaper, not including installation. White floating shelves filled with children's books and stuffed animals cost $600. In the end, I had spent $35,000 on furniture alone, not counting the other $10,000 I spent on curtains, rugs, lamps, wall art, decorative items, quality bedding, and fluffy towels for the bathrooms. $45,000 in total, plus the $250,000 down payment. I had almost $300,000 invested in that property before they even spent a single night there. But I didn't care. I saw it as an investment in my family's happiness, in my granddaughter's future, and Jennifer's gratitude seemed genuine. She hugged me constantly, thanked me repeatedly, and said she would never be able to repay such generosity. Moving day was in June of 2015, a sunny and warm Saturday typical of a summer in Atlanta. I hired a professional moving company to transport their belongings from the apartment to their new home. It cost $1,200, but they ensured everything was done in an organized and stress-free manner. I also hired a cleaning crew to deep clean the house before they moved in, another $800 to ensure everything was spotless. I spent the entire day there helping organize, unpack boxes, and decide where everything would go. Emily was absolutely delighted with the new house. She ran from room to room, exploring every nook and cranny, amazed by the size of the property. When I showed her the princess bedroom we'd prepared, she squealed with joy so loudly that everyone in the house heard. She jumped on the new bed, testing the soft mattress, opened every book on the shelves, hugged every stuffed animal. Seeing that pure joy on her face made every penny worth it. That night, after everything was more or less organized, we ordered pizza for everyone and ate it sitting on the living room floor, laughing and talking about plans for the future. The first few months in their new home were absolutely wonderful. I would visit them at least twice a week, sometimes more. I always brought something with me, some treat. A homemade cake, I'd baked a flowering plant for the garden, a new toy for Emily's expensive cleaning products I knew Jennifer liked. Jennifer and I would spend entire afternoons together drinking coffee by the pool while watching Emily play in the water with her floaties and inflatable toys. She would tell me about her daily life, how she was adjusting to the new neighborhood, about the other mothers she'd met at the local park. She seemed genuinely happy, genuinely grateful. She always emphasized how this house had changed their lives for the better, how Emily was thriving in such a beautiful, spacious environment. But big houses also come with big expenses, something Robert and Jennifer soon discovered. The monthly electric bill was 3 times higher than in their apartment, especially in the summer, when the air conditioning had to cool 400 square feet. Pool maintenance cost $200 a month with a specialized company. The landscaping required constant care. And then began the unexpected problems that every home eventually faces. 6 months after moving in December of 2015, the pool heating system completely broke down. The technician explained that the equipment was old and had reached the end of its useful life, needing a complete replacement. The cost would be $12,000 for a new efficient system. Robert called me visibly concerned, explaining the situation. He said they didn't have that kind of money available, that they would have to drain and close the pool until they could save up for the repair. But it was almost Christmas. Emily loved swimming, and they had planned a pool party for her birthday in March. I didn't think twice. I said I would pay for the repair as a Christmas present for the family. Robert tried to argue, saying everything I had done was already too much, but I insisted. I called the company, gave my credit card, and authorized the service. The following summer, it was the central air conditioning system that failed during a particularly brutal heat wave when temperatures in Atlanta reached 98 degrees. The house became unbearably hot. Jennifer called me in a near panic, saying she was worried about Emily, that the heat was dangerous for a child. The air conditioning technician confirmed that the entire system needed replacing another piece of equipment at the end of its useful life. $8,000 this time. Again, I paid without hesitation. After all, I couldn't let my granddaughter suffer in the intense heat. I also paid for a new roof when leaks were discovered during a heavy storm, $15,000. For a new water heater when the old one started leaking, $3,000. For repairs to the pool deck when the wood began to rot, $6,000. Over the course of 3 years, he had invested another $60,000 in maintenance and improvements to the house. He was now close to $400,000 invested in total. But Robert and Jennifer never mentioned starting to pay me back. Not a small payment, not a plan, not a conversation about when they would begin. And I, foolish and complacent as I was, never brought it up either. I was afraid of seeming self-serving, of ruining the relationship we'd built, of making it seem like my help came with strings attached. So I simply kept giving, and hoping they'd eventually offer to start giving back. But the subtle changes in Jennifer's behavior were already beginning to appear. Around 2017, when Emily was about 8, it started with small things that in isolation didn't seem significant, but together they formed a worrying pattern. She began making comments about my frequency of visits. Even though I always called before going, she'd say things like, "Oh, you again?" Or, "I didn't know you were coming today," delivered in a tone that carried a hint of barely concealed irritation. She complained that the gifts I gave Emily were excessive and inappropriate, that I was creating unrealistic expectations for her about money and consumption. Once, after I bought Emily a beautiful pink electric bike that cost $2,500, Jennifer called me, visibly angry, saying I had to stop giving her expensive gifts without consulting her first, that I was undermining her authority as a mother, that Emily was becoming spoiled, and expecting expensive things all the time. I was shocked by her reaction since Emily had mentioned several times that she wanted that bike, and I thought it would be a special birthday present. I tried to explain my intentions, but Jennifer simply said we needed to set boundaries from then on. I also began to notice that our conversations became more superficial and less frequent. Before, she would call me several times a week just to chat, telling me details about her day, asking for advice on everyday situations. Now, if I didn't call first, we could go weeks without speaking. When I did call, the conversations were short and hurried. She was always busy with something, always had to go do something, always had an excuse to wrap up quickly. Visits also started to get increasingly complicated. I used to go on Wednesday afternoons and Sunday mornings, a pattern we'd established that worked well. But Jennifer started scheduling appointments right around those times. Doctor's appointments, birthday parties for Emily's friends, shopping trips, visits to her parents who lived across town. There was always something that prevented my visit. When I suggested rescheduling for another day, she'd say the week was too busy, better to wait until next time. And so I was gradually cut out of their routine. I tried to talk to Robert about what I was noticing, but he downplayed everything. He said I was being overly sensitive, that Jennifer was just going through a stressful time at work, that I needed to give them more space to have their own family routine. But I knew there was something deeper going on. The way Jennifer looked at me had changed. Where before there was affection and acceptance, now I saw only forced tolerance and even poorly disguised irritation. The situation escalated dramatically on Christmas Day of 2018. We'd had plans for weeks to spend December 25th together, as we'd done religiously every year since Emily was born. It was a sacred tradition for me, one of the most important dates on the calendar. I spent weeks choosing the perfect gifts. For Robert, a $15,000 Rolex Submariner. Watch, something he'd always wanted but could never afford for himself. For Jennifer, a Louis Vuitton never-full bag she'd casually mentioned months earlier. $8,000. For Emily, an electric bike. She'd been begging for $2,500 plus a new iPad, with all the bells and whistles over. $1,000 plus designer clothes, more books, more toys. I spent nearly $30,000 on Christmas gifts for the three of them alone. I also spent the entire 24th in the kitchen making cinnamon apple pie, Robert's absolute favorite dessert since he was a child. I used my grandmother's recipe with thinly sliced Granny Smith apples, a generous amount of cinnamon and brown sugar, and homemade puff pastry that took hours to prepare. It was a pie I made with love, each layer representing the years of dedication I had given to that family. On the morning of the 25th, I woke at 6 a.m., even though it was a holiday, dressed myself carefully, put on my favorite festive red dress, and tied my hair in an elegant updo. I loaded the car with all the presents, carefully wrapped in silver paper with gold bows, the pie still warm in its glass pan, and a bottle of expensive red wine I had bought especially for the occasion. I drove to their house with my heart full of anticipation, imagining Emily's surprised face as she opened the gifts. Robert's smile when he saw the clock, even a genuine thank you from Jennifer. I arrived exactly at 10 in the morning as we had agreed. I parked in the circular driveway, grabbed several gift bags I could barely carry all at once, and walked to the front door. I rang the doorbell and waited, listening to the familiar chime echoing inside the house. I waited a minute, 2 minutes, nothing. I rang again. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching and the door opened, revealing Jennifer in a bright red silk robe, her hair disheveled, her face puffy, as if she had just woken up, and an expression of surprise followed immediately by irritation. She looked at me, then at the bags in my hands, then back at my face, and sighed deeply in a way that made it clear my presence was a huge inconvenience. I smiled, trying to maintain a positive energy, and said, "Good morning, Merry Christmas. I'm looking forward to spending the day with you." What Jennifer said next is etched in my memory with painful clarity. She said in a cold, emotionless voice that she'd forgotten to call me yesterday to cancel, that her parents had decided to come to lunch last minute, and there wouldn't be enough room for everyone at the table. I stood there, clutching those heavy bags, processing what I'd just heard. It was Christmas. We'd had plans for weeks. I'd confirmed with Robert only 3 days earlier. and she'd simply forgotten to tell me I was no longer welcome. I tried to maintain my composure, but my voice shook as I spoke. She said it was okay that I could come back later when her parents had left, maybe for dinner or just to deliver the gifts. Jennifer shook her head slowly, looking somewhere over my shoulder, avoiding my direct gaze. She said she wouldn't do it, that they had plans for the evening too, that it would be better to leave it for another day. Another day? Christmas. The most important holiday of the year, the tradition we religiously upheld, reduced to another day. I felt tears welling up, but I refused to cry in front of her. In as firm a voice as I could muster, I told her I could at least leave the gifts. Jennifer reached out and practically snatched the bags from me without even looking inside, without asking what they were, without showing a hint of curiosity or gratitude. She just picked up the heavy bags as if they were an inconvenient burden she needed to get out of the door as quickly as possible. I asked if I could at least speak to Emily quickly to wish her Merry Christmas, that she was probably still asleep, but Jennifer could wake her up for just a minute. Jennifer said no, that Emily had slept late the night before and needed to rest, that I could call her later if I wanted. Then, before I could say another word, she simply said I have to go and close the door in my face. Close the door. On me. On Christmas morning, I stood there for a few seconds, staring at that solid wood door with the festive wreath hanging from it still, holding the pie she had lovingly baked and the expensive wine. Inside the house, I could hear muffled sounds of movement, perhaps Christmas music playing softly. My family was inside just a few feet away, and I was outside, excluded, rejected, discarded, as if I meant nothing. I returned to the car in shock, placed the pie and wine in the passenger seat, got behind the wheel, and just sat there for several minutes, unable to process what had just happened. Then the tears came. I cried right there in the car parked in the driveway of the house I had bought, furnished, and maintained with hundreds of thousands of dollars. I cried for all the generosity that had been thrown back in my face. I cried for the granddaughter I wouldn't be able to see for Christmas. I cried for the son who allowed this to happen. I cried for myself and for the foolish, naive person I had been to believe that my money could buy love and belonging. I drove back to my small, quiet apartment, climbed the stairs as if each step weighed 1,000 pounds, opened the door, and went straight to the couch where I flopped down and cried. I spent the entire Christmas alone. I didn't even turn on the television. I didn't even heat up any food. I just sat there on the couch, hugging a pillow, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong, what I'd done so terrible to deserve such treatment. The pie sat in the kitchen untouched. I eventually threw it away 3 days later because I couldn't even look at it without feeling the pain renewed. On December 26th, I called Robert. He answered on the 5th ring, his voice too cheerful to be genuine. I asked him why he'd let this happen, why he hadn't defended me, why he hadn't insisted I stay with Jennifer's parents. After all, wasn't their room, the dining room table I'd bought, had 8 seats? There always had been room before. Robert sighed and began apologizing. He said Jennifer was very stressed about her parents' visit, that they had complicated family issues, and she needed to focus on them. That? I needed to understand that sometimes plans change. I asked why no one called me sooner, why I had to find out on the doorstep on Christmas morning. Silence on the other end of the line. Then he said in a weary voice I'd never heard from him before, that Jennifer had said she'd warned me, that she thought I knew. That was even worse. Was he lying to protect me, or did he genuinely believe Jennifer's version? Either option was devastating. He said we needed to meet to talk properly, that this couldn't go on like this. Robert said he was busy with work the following week, but that we could schedule something after New Year's. After New Year's. More waiting. More procrastination. More putting me last on his list of priorities. The following months were a blur of confusion and mounting emotional pain. I tried calling, but the calls went unanswered. He sent text messages that went unanswered for days. When I finally got replies, they were cold and monosyllabic. Okay, we're busy, maybe later. I tried to schedule visits, but there was always some impediment. Emily had too much homework, or she had rehearsal for the school play, or she was sick and couldn't have visitors. Always a different excuse, but the result was always the same, me being kept at a distance. In February of 2019, on my 68th birthday, I waited all day for a connection. I sat in my apartment with the phone next to me, checking every few minutes to make sure I hadn't missed a call. Nothing, neither Robert nor Jennifer nor Emily called to wish me a happy birthday. At 8 o'clock that night, when it was clear no one was going to call, I texted Robert, "Today's my birthday." He replied 3 hours later, "Sorry, Mom, it's been a busy day." "Happy birthday." "Sorry, Mom, it was a busy day." As if his own mother's birthday were something that could simply slip by amidst the hustle and bustle of the day. As if I'd become so irrelevant that I didn't even deserve to be on his radar. That night marked a turning point in my consciousness. I began to truly realize that something was deeply wrong. This wasn't just a rough patch or temporary stress. I was being actively excluded, erased from their lives. And not by accident or distraction, but deliberately and systematically. I decided I needed to try again. I needed to make a serious effort to reconnect, to understand what was happening and try to fix it. I arranged a lunch for the three of us at an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Atlanta. It took 2 weeks of persistent messaging and contacting before I got a confirmation. I arrived 15 minutes early, impeccably dressed, mentally prepared to have a difficult but necessary conversation. They arrived 10 minutes late. Robert greeted me with a quick, half-hearted hug. Jennifer gave me a nod. Emily, now 10, barely met my eyes when she greeted me. We sat at a table by the window overlooking the busy street. The ambiance was elegant, with white tablecloths and fresh flowers on each table, but the atmosphere between the four of us was tense and uncomfortable. I tried to start conversations. I asked Emily about school, her favorite subjects, her friends. She responded in monosyllables. Good, cool, I don't know. I asked if she still liked to draw, something she used to love and do with me when I was little. She shrugged. I tried with Robert, asking about work, about new projects. He gave generic, uninformative answers. Jennifer spent the entire time on her phone, scrolling distractedly, occasionally showing Robert something they were discussing among themselves, leaving me completely out of the conversation. It was one of the most uncomfortable lunches of my life. The food I ordered, a mushroom risotto I usually love, was tasteless. Every bite was an effort. The silence between us was broken only by my desperate efforts to maintain some conversation and the short, disinterested responses I received. When the bill arrived, $340 for that miserable experience, I was obviously the one who paid. As I placed my credit card on the tray, I had a bitter thought: was that all I was to them, a walking credit card? A convenient source of cash in the parking lot. I tried one last time. I gently grabbed Robert's arm and told him we needed to talk, just the two of us, about what was happening in our relationship. He looked at Jennifer as if asking permission, and then said it wasn't a good time, that he was really busy at work. I insisted it could be a quick coffee, just 30 minutes of his time. He said he'd check his schedule and let me know. He never did. That was the last time I saw Emily for almost 3 years. So I decided to do what I thought they were asking for: give them space. I stopped calling constantly. I stopped sending daily messages. I stopped trying to force visits. I thought maybe my absence would make them miss me, make them realize the void. I'd leave, make them reach out of their own free will. I spent 3 months waiting. March, April, May of 2019. Absolute silence. Not a call. Not a message. Nothing. It was as if I'd simply ceased to exist for them. In June, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to their house on a Saturday afternoon. Robert's car was in the garage, so he knew someone was home. I rang the doorbell repeatedly. No one answered. I walked around to the back of the house, where I had a view of the kitchen through the large window. He could see Jennifer inside with Emily, the two of them baking cookies together. Flour scattered on the marble counter, laughter and lively conversation. I knocked on the window, trying to get their attention. Jennifer looked directly at me. Our eyes met. For a brief moment, I thought she would answer, that she would explain what was happening. Instead, she simply turned her back and continued what she was doing, as if I were a ghost, as if I didn't exist. Emily followed her mother's example and didn't even glance in my direction. I stood there for a few more minutes, occasionally banging on the window. feeling completely ridiculous and desperate before finally giving up and getting back in the car. That was the moment I knew with absolute certainty they didn't want me in their lives anymore. Not temporarily, not just until things got better. They had made a conscious decision to cut me off completely, and I didn't understand why. What had I done that was so terrible that night, sitting alone in my apartment with only the light from the television illuminating the room? I called my lawyer, Richard Morrison. It was a Saturday night and I felt bad for bothering him, but I needed legal advice about my situation. Richard answered with his usual calm, professional voice. I explained everything that was happening, the gradual exclusion, the cold treatment, the lack of contact. Then I asked about the house. What exactly was my legal position? Richard took the files and reviewed the documents as we talked. It confirmed what I already knew but had sort of forgotten over the years. The property was registered solely in my name. Robert and Jennifer were legally tenants living in my home rent-free. They had never reimbursed me a single cent of the $250,000 down payment I'd made. They'd never made a single payment. Technically, the mortgage was in my name too, and I was responsible for it, although they made the monthly payments to the bank. But the agreement was that they would pay me back the down payment, and that never happened. Richard asked if I wanted to take legal action. I hesitated. The idea of suing my own son seemed unthinkable. But Richard advised that, at the very least, I should have a very clear conversation with them about expectations and establish a formal repayment plan with specific deadlines. He said that leaving the situation undefined like that wasn't protecting anyone and could cause bigger problems down the road. I agreed to schedule a formal meeting with Robert to discuss the property issue. It took me over a month to schedule one. Robert always had excuses: too much work, a business trip, sick family commitments. Finally, in August of 2019, we managed to arrange a Tuesday morning coffee date at a Starbucks near his office. I arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a cappuccino that I could barely drink due to nerves, and waited. Robert arrived exactly on time, wearing a dark suit with a blue tie, looking tired. He ordered a double espresso and sat in the chair across from me with his arms crossed defensively as closed. Body posture indicating he was already on the defensive before we even began talking. I tried to start gently and non-confrontationally. I told him I missed him and Emily, that I didn't understand why I was being so dramatically excluded from their lives. I asked if I had done something wrong, if I had unwittingly offended anyone, if we could talk openly about what was going on. Robert sighed deeply, looked down at the coffee in front of him, and launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. I said Jennifer felt I was too present before, that I interfered too much in their decisions about how to raise Emily, that my expensive gifts created unrealistic expectations for her about money and materialism, that I frequently showed up unannounced and felt invasive, even though I always called first. That my generosity made Jennifer feel inadequate as a provider, as if I were constantly reminding them that they needed me financially. Each accusation was like a knife. I countered point by point. I never interfered in their upbringing unless they explicitly asked for my opinion. The gifts were expressions of grandmotherly love, not attempts to instill materialism. I always called before visiting and only went when they confirmed everything was okay. My generosity was genuine, without ulterior motives or a desire to make anyone feel inferior. Robert listened to everything, but seemed to be just waiting for me to finish talking rather than truly processing what I was saying. When I finished, he simply repeated that Jennifer felt this way and that he needed to support his wife, that I needed to respect the boundaries they were setting. It was then that I decided to broach the subject of the house. I said we needed to get the property in order, that years had passed and they had never begun to reimburse me the $250,000 down payment I'd made as per the original agreement. Robert's face went completely pale. His expression changed from defensive to shocked. He slammed his coffee down so hard that some spilled out of the lid. He said he thought the money had been a gift, not a loan, a gift. $250,000? I was incredulous. I calmly, but firmly explained that no, it was definitely not a gift, that we'd made that very clear from the beginning, that the house was in my name specifically because of this loan arrangement, that there were documents signed by both of us acknowledging it. Robert began to become visibly agitated. He said he needed to check the documents, that he didn't remember those details, that it had been years ago. I offered to show him copies of all the paperwork Richard had saved. He shook his head and said it wasn't necessary right now, but that he'd talk to Jennifer about it. Then his expression changed from shock to something closer to anger. He said I couldn't be serious about wanting the money back now that they were building a life there, that Emily was settled in at the neighborhood school, that moving would be traumatic for her. I replied that I wasn't threatening anything, wasn't demanding they move out or pay everything at once. I just wanted to establish a clear repayment plan, perhaps. Reasonable monthly payments over many years, something that was manageable for them, but also recognized my investment and my right to be repaid eventually. Robert was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the busy street outside. Then he grabbed his coffee, stood up, and said he had to go, that he had an important meeting at the office. He said he'd talk to Jennifer and that they'd be in touch. He left without a proper goodbye, leaving me alone with my cold cappuccino and a sinking feeling in my stomach that I'd made things much worse. That same night around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Jennifer. I didn't even wait for a full hello before I started yelling. Her voice was several octaves higher than normal, filled with pure rage. She accused me of trying to take their house away from them, of wanting to leave Emily homeless, of being a cruel and manipulative person who used money to control her son's life. She said I had never ever made it clear that I expected the money back, that it was a gift from mother to son like any decent mother would. That I was making this whole story up now because I resented them for establishing healthy boundaries, for no longer wanting me around all the time. I tried to remain calm despite her volume and tone. I explained again about the documents, about the conversations we'd had with Richard, about how everything had been clearly established as a loan from the start. Jennifer wouldn't listen. She interrupted me, saying I'd have to step over her body to get the house back, that she'd fight with everything. That she'd hire the best lawyer she could find. She told me I would never come near Emily again as long as she had anything to say about it, that she would tell everyone what a horrible person I really was, that she would expose my cruelty publicly. The call lasted over 40 minutes of accusations, screams, personal insults about my character, my failure as a mother in raising Robert, my attempt to destroy a happy family out of pure malice. I tried to respond, tried to defend myself, but she simply screamed over me. Eventually, when it became clear there was no possibility of rational dialogue, I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking violently. My heart was beating so fast I felt dizzy. I spent that entire night awake, lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, reliving every moment of the past few years. Had I really been unclear about the household layout? Had my actions over the years truly seemed controlling and manipulative? Had I been the villain in this story without realizing it? But in the clear light of the next morning, when I reread all the emails exchanged during the house purchase, when I reviewed copies of the signed documents, I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't crazy or making things up. Everything was documented in black and white. I had explained it clearly. They had explicitly agreed. Robert had responded to an email saying, "Thank you, Mom, for lending us this money. We'll work to pay you back as soon as we can." Signed documents specifically stating that the property would remain in my name until the down payment was fully repaid. There was no ambiguity. There was only selective memory convenience now that we were faced with responsibility. In the days following Jennifer's outburst, I received no contact from Robert. No apologetic calls, no attempts to mediate, no acknowledgement of what had happened. It was as if he had simply decided to side completely with Jennifer and leave me alone to process everything. I spent weeks in a state of profound emotional distress. I had trouble sleeping, ate little, and could barely concentrate on anything. I cried spontaneously at random moments throughout the day. The loneliness was overwhelming. I began to question everything about my life, my choices, my worth as a person. It was my neighbor Helen, a kind lady from the apartment next door, who finally convinced me to seek professional help. She saw me in the hallway one day, eyes red from crying, and asked with genuine concern if I was okay. I broke down right there and told her everything. Helen listened with patience and compassion and then firmly suggested I see a therapist. She said I needed professional support to process all of this, that it was too important to try to handle alone. I took her advice and scheduled a session with Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist specializing in family conflict and relationship dynamics. The first session was cathartic. I told her the whole story from the beginning of my relationship with Jennifer to the present. Dr. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, nodding sympathetically. When I finished speaking, she said something that stuck with me. You have confused generosity with love and self-worth with usefulness. She explained that I had spent years trying to buy belonging through gifts and financial support, that I had used money as a substitute for establishing genuine emotional connections, based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. That by giving without ever demanding appreciation or appropriate reciprocity, I taught people to take me for granted. Those words were hard to hear, but necessary. I began weekly therapy with Dr. Patricia and gradually began to understand patterns in my behavior that harked back to childhood, to the way I was raised to believe that women needed to be useful to be loved. That sacrifice was the greatest virtue. Months passed without any contact with Robert or Jennifer. Absolute silence. I no longer tried to reach out, and they certainly made no effort. Emily's birthday in March 2020 passed and I wasn't invited, nor did I even receive a message with photos. My own birthday in April passed again without acknowledgement. Mother's Day passed without a call. It was as if I had been completely erased from their existence. And then in December of 2020, almost exactly 2 years after that disastrous Christmas, I received a thick envelope by certified mail. My heart sank when I saw the law firm's name in the upper corner. I opened it with trembling hands and found a summons. Robert and Jennifer were suing me for ownership of the house. They claimed adverse possession, a legal concept that allows people to claim ownership of a property if they live there long enough without dispute. They claimed they had lived in the house for more than 5 years, made all mortgage payments maintained, and improved the property, and therefore had a legal right to it. They also alleged that I had promised the house as a gift, but was now trying to renege on it for petty and vindictive reasons. The lawsuit was accompanied by written statements in which Jennifer and Robert painted a picture of me as a controlling and manipulative mother who used money as a weapon, who constantly interfered in Emily's upbringing against their wishes, and who intentionally created family conflict. They described situations I recognized, but which were completely distorted. That time I bought Emily the expensive bicycle in Jennifer's testimony, it became an example of how I deliberately undermined her authority as a mother by giving extravagant gifts against her expressed wishes. My frequent visits, described as constant invasions of their privacy, unannounced appearances that caused stress and discomfort. My help with Emily as a baby, portrayed as an attempt to seize control and position myself as the primary maternal figure competing with Jennifer. I read every word of those documents with growing horror and disbelief. How could they distort reality so much? How could my own son sign his name to statements that painted me as a monster? I called Richard immediately. He read the documents carefully, and then assured me with professional confidence that their case had no solid legal basis. The property was registered in my name with clear documentation, had all the emails and contracts proving it was a loan, not a gift. Their paying the mortgage didn't give them any rights to the property when the deed was in my name. The adverse possession claim was ridiculous because they lived there with my explicit permission, not as trespassers. Richard said he would respond to the lawsuit with confidence, that we would have to go to hearings and depositions, but that he was certain the judge would rule in my favor. He was right about the legal side of it all, but he completely underestimated the emotional toll. The lawsuit dragged on for over a year and was one of the most painful experiences of my life. I had to sit in deposition rooms being questioned by Robert and Jennifer's aggressive lawyers who asked questions designed to make me look bad. Why? Did you feel the need to be so present in Emily's life? Didn't you feel like you were interfering too much? Did you use expensive gifts to buy affection? Did you resent them when they set boundaries? Every question was a potential trap, every answer carefully analyzed for some admission he could use against me. I had to listen to Robert testify under oath about how he felt controlled by me all his life, how he felt he couldn't make his own decisions without my interference. Jennifer cried as she described how inadequate she felt around me, how she feared I was trying to steal Emily's love. These narratives were so distorted from the reality, I knew that I sometimes questioned my own sanity. Was this how they genuinely perceived the situations? Or were they deliberately creating these stories to justify taking property that didn't belong to them? The legal costs piled up quickly. Richard charged $350 an hour, and the case required hundreds of hours of work. Document preparation, legal research meetings with me, depositions, preliminary hearings, motions, and countermotions. In the end, I spent over $50,000 in legal fees. And that was just my share. Robert and Jennifer also had expensive legal counsel, and I wondered how they were paying for it with their limited financial resources. I later discovered that Jennifer's parents had borrowed money to cover the legal costs, which explained their investment in the distorted narrative. They had a financial incentive to win. The court hearings were even worse than the depositions. We had to sit in the same room sometimes, just feet apart. Me on my side of the room, with Richard them on the other side with their lawyer. Robert avoided my gaze completely, looking anywhere but in my direction. Jennifer occasionally stared at me with an expression of pure hatred that made me freeze. Neither of them showed a hint of remorse or conflict about suing a mother and mother-in-law who had given so much to them. There were depositions, counter-depositions, evidence presented, witnesses called. Jennifer called her friends to testify about comments I'd allegedly made, things I'd allegedly done that demonstrated controlling behavior. Robert called coworkers to testify about the stress I'd allegedly caused him. I called Richard to testify about the original documents and the clear intent to borrow. I called my accountant to show records of every payment I'd made over the years related to the house. I even called my neighbor Helen, who testified about my devastated, emotional state, about how clearly I felt genuinely hurt by the situation. Finally, in September of 2021, almost 2 years after it all began, the day of the final decision arrived. The judge, a gray-haired man in his 60s named Judge Harold Morrison, reviewed all the documents heard, closing arguments from both attorneys, and then rendered his decision. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes, detailing his legal reasoning. He said the documentation made it absolutely clear that the property legally belonged to me, that the fact that Robert and Jennifer lived there and paid the mortgage did not change the ownership of the deed, that the claim of adverse possession was baseless because they lived there with my explicit permission, that the emails exchanged at the time of the purchase unequivocally demonstrated that the arrangement was a loan, not a gift. He ruled completely in my favor. The house was mine. Robert and Jennifer had no legal claim to it. I had two options: demand that they pay me the $250,000. Down payment plus inflation adjustments and reasonable interest, which totaled about $320,000. Or demand that they vacate the property. The judge gave them 60 days to decide which course of action they would take, pay or leave. I heard the decision with a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief at having been legally vindicated, at having been proven not to be crazy or making the whole story up, but also profound sadness at having reached this point, at having to use the legal system to force my own son to acknowledge the truth. I looked at Robert, hoping to see at least some recognition, some shame for having put me through all of this. But he simply got up and walked out of the courtroom with Jennifer, not even glancing in my direction. Richard squeezed my shoulder and said congratulations, that it was the right decision, that justice had been served. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a monumental loss. In the following weeks, negotiations were attempted through the lawyers. Robert and Jennifer tried to propose an extended payment plan where they would pay me $1,000 a month for the next 26 years until I paid off the debt. Richard advised against accepting. He said such a long-term plan without adequate guarantees was risky, that given the deteriorated relationship, it would be difficult to guarantee compliance over such a long period. He also said that, based on their behavior up to that point, there was little evidence they would honor their commitment. He was right. Besides, I was exhausted, emotionally exhausted from years of being mistreated. Exhausted from trying to maintain a relationship with people who clearly didn't want me in their lives. Exhausted from being treated like a vile person when all I did was give and give and give. Through Richard, I informed them that I wouldn't accept a payment plan. They would have to vacate the property within the deadline set by the judge. The reaction was explosive. Jennifer started a social media campaign painting me as a mean and cruel mother-in-law. She posted photos of Emily with captions about how the greedy grandmother was throwing her granddaughter out on the street. She created narratives about how I had promised the house as a gift and was now going back on it, to punish them for setting healthy boundaries. She shared post after post with cherry-picked and distorted details of the situation, always painting me as a villain. Mutual friends began avoiding me on the street crossing to the other side when they saw me coming. I received private messages from people I'd known for years saying they were disappointed in me, that they hadn't expected me to be capable of such cruelty. Some even told me directly that I was wrong, that I should forgive the debt and let them stay in the house. The social pressure was immense, but I stood my ground with the support of Dr. Patricia, who constantly reminded me that setting boundaries wasn't cruel, that protecting my investment wasn't greed, that I had a right to demand respect and recognition. They finally moved in January 2022, 3 weeks before the deadline. They didn't tell me when. They didn't ask for help. They simply packed up their things and left. I learned from Richard that they had rented a smaller house in Decatur, a more modest neighborhood compared to Buckhead. I tried calling Robert to ask about Emily, if she was okay, if they needed any help with the transition. He didn't answer. I sent messages expressing genuine concern. They went unanswered. That was almost 3 years ago now, and you already know the rest of the story in part. I kept the house boarded up throughout 2022, emotionally unable to handle it. I paid contractors for maintenance but avoided the property. Every room in that house was filled with memories of happier times that now seemed tarnished. But that humiliation at Emily's 15th birthday party was the final turning point. Seeing Jennifer dismiss me at the door of the house. I'd bought being treated like an unwanted intruder at my own granddaughter's birthday that crystallized everything. That night, after crying for hours, I called Richard and told him I wanted to sell the property immediately. I no longer wanted any connection to that place. Richard put the house on the market, and as he predicted, it sold quickly. The Buckhead real estate market was booming, and a property of that caliber was highly desirable. We received several offers in less than 4 weeks. I accepted an offer of $1.2 million from a young family moving from New York. After paying the remaining mortgage and closing costs, I made about $400,000. More than my original investment. It was a considerable sum, but it didn't bring me joy. It was just money. It couldn't buy back the lost years with Emily. It couldn't heal the broken relationship with Robert. It couldn't erase the pain of everything that had happened. With part of the profits, I bought a smaller but comfortable house in a gated community in Roswell, about 40 minutes from where Robert lived. Nothing ostentatious, just 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, but it was completely mine-died-free and free of painful connections to the past. I invested the rest of the money wisely, following my accountant's advice, creating a diversified portfolio that would provide me with financial security for the rest of my life. I also decided to do something I'd never done before: live for myself. I began reconnecting with old friendships I'd neglected for years, while focusing all my energy on Robert and his family. I rejoined the book club I'd attended before Emily was born and discovered I still loved the lively discussions about literature. I signed up for watercolor painting classes at a local art studio and discovered a talent I never knew I had. My landscapes weren't masterpieces, but the process of creating was therapeutic and satisfying. I began volunteering at an animal shelter 3 times a week, walking dogs and socializing cats. The unconditional love those animals offered without expectations or manipulation healed something inside me. Slowly, month by month, I rebuilt a life that had meaning and purpose independent of anyone else. I no longer depended on Robert's approval or Emily's presence to feel complete. It was still painful. There were moments when homesickness hit with devastating force, but I was learning to be whole on my own. It was in November of 2023 during a Thanksgiving party hosted by my neighbor, Helen, in the condominium that I met Thomas Bradford. He was a kind man of 72 who had moved into the condominium a few months earlier. He was a widower, having lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. We talked all night about everything and nothing. He told me about his 45 years of happy marriage, about how he still missed his wife but was learning to live alone. His 2 sons lived in other states, one in California and the other in Florida, but they maintained regular contact, visiting several times a year, calling weekly. He spoke of them with genuine pride, but without the sharp pain I felt when I thought of Robert. We began seeing each other regularly. Sunday breakfasts at the local bakery, walks in Stone Mountain Park on cool autumn afternoons, home-cooked dinners where we took turns cooking for each other. Thomas made me laugh again, something I hadn't genuinely done in years. He was kind, attentive, and respectful of my emotional boundaries. He knew I'd been through a difficult family situation, but he never pressed for details, simply offering a calm presence and quiet support. It wasn't a steamy movie romance. We were too old for that. But it was a deep companionship, a genuine connection based on mutual respect and shared interests. For the first time in decades, I felt someone valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. In April of 2024, I turned 70. Thomas organized a small surprise party at my apartment with Helen and other friends from the condo. There was homemade chocolate cake made by Helen, simple but cheerful decorations, and modest but carefully chosen gifts. There were only 8 people, but each one was there because they genuinely liked me and wanted to celebrate with me. I didn't get a call from Robert that day. I didn't get a message, but for the first time, that absence didn't destroy me. It hurt, of course it did, but it didn't define me. I had other people now, other connections, other sources of love and belonging. And then completely unexpectedly, in July of 2024, my phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize. I answered hesitantly and heard a young, familiar but changed voice on the other end. It was Emily, my granddaughter, now 16, with a voice that had completely matured since the last time we'd spoken. She was crying. Between sobs, she said she'd gotten my number from Aunt Linda, Robert's younger sister, who still maintained sporadic contact with me. Emily said she urgently needed to talk to me, that she'd discovered things, that she now understood what really happened. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. We arranged to meet the next day at a cafe in Virginia, Highland Neutral Territory, where she felt safe. I spent that entire night awake, alternating between hope and fear. Hope of finally reconnecting with my granddaughter. Fear that it was some kind of trap or deception. The next morning I arrived 15 minutes early, too nervous to wait at home. I ordered chamomile tea to calm my nerves and sat at a table near the window where I could see the street. When Emily entered the cafe, I barely recognized her. The girl I remembered had blossomed into a young woman. Tall, thin, with long dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders. A thin face with delicate features that reminded me so much of Robert at that age. She saw me and hesitated for a moment in the doorway, eyes red from recent tears. Then she walked to my table and, without saying a word, hugged me tightly. I hugged her back, feeling years of pain begin to dissolve in that moment. We sat down and she began to speak, words coming out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them in for too long. She said she'd always known something was wrong with the narrative her parents told her about me. That she had vivid memories of being little, of how affectionate and present I was, of how we played together, of how loved and safe. She felt with me. It never made sense that this loving grandmother had suddenly become the mean and cruel person her parents described. When she turned 16 and gained more freedom, she began asking more persistent questions. Her parents gave vague and contradictory answers that only heightened her suspicions. So she began searching on her own. She rummaged through documents at home when her parents were away. She found copies of court papers hidden in a box in her father's office. She read everything: the original house purchase documents, the emails exchanged with me, the loan agreement, the judge's decision. She understood that the story she'd been told was a severely distorted version of reality. That her parents were living on property that was mine, that they never paid me back, that they sued me, trying to take something that didn't belong to them, that I had every legal and moral right to get my property back. Emily cried as she told me all this. She said she felt betrayed by her parents, manipulated for years, used as a pawn in a power game she didn't understand, who now saw how she had been deprived of a relationship with a grandmother who truly cared about her because of her parents' pride and greed. I held her hands across the table and told her with all sincerity that there was nothing to forgive on her part. She was a child when it all began, a victim of circumstance as much as I was. I never blamed her for a second, that I always knew she was simply doing what she was told was right. We talked for almost 4 hours in that cafe. I told my full and honest version of the story, without omitting my own mistakes, without exaggerating her parents' failings beyond the facts. She deserved to know the whole truth, but she also deserved for me to be fair and balanced in the way I presented it. I asked about her life, school, future plans, dreams. Emily said she wanted to study architecture, that she had always loved drawing houses and spaces, imagining how people would live in them. She showed me some sketches she had made on the phone, and they were genuinely impressive, full of detail and creativity. My heart swelled with pride seeing her talent blossom. I immediately offered financial assistance for college when the time came. I had already lost so many years of her life, I didn't want financial limitations to hinder her dreams as well. But Emily hesitated. She said her parents probably wouldn't accept my money, that they'd become extremely proud of their ability to not depend on me for anything. I understood perfectly, but I told her the offer was permanently available, that she decided to accept in the future, the door was open. From that day on, we began meeting regularly in secret. Emily didn't tell her parents she'd reached out. I knew it would cause immense conflict, and she still lived with them, still dependent on them for everything basic. It was a delicate situation, but we were rebuilding our relationship carefully, one meeting at a time. We talked about everything: art, music, politics, relationships, the future. She told me about school friends, her boyfriend. I shared about my new life in the condominium, about Thomas, about painting classes and volunteering with animals. Little by little, something beautiful was growing from the rubble of the previous destruction. In September of 2024, Emily began the college application process. She had excellent grades, a strong track record in extracurricular activities, and an impressive portfolio of architectural projects. I was applying to competitive programs at several universities, including Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, and even some elite schools like Cornell and MIT, but when we discussed financial matters, I saw genuine concern in her eyes. Robert and Jennifer simply couldn't afford colleges at that level. Tuition could reach $70,000 a year at private schools. Even public universities cost $20,000 a year, including housing. Emily worked part-time at a coffee shop, earning $15 an hour, but it was clearly insufficient. Student loans would cover part of the cost, but would leave her with crushing debt upon graduation. I made my decision then and there. I told Emily I would pay for her entire education, all tuition, housing, books, supplies, everything, but with one important condition she had to tell her parents. I didn't want any more secrets. I didn't want to build a relationship based on lies and concealment. If she accepted my help, she would need to be completely transparent about the source of the money. Emily was visibly nervous at the idea, but agreed. A few days later, I received a call from Robert. It was the first time we'd spoken directly in over 2 years. His voice was tense, carefully controlled. I told him Emily had told me about our secret meetings over the past few months, about my offer to pay for college. I told him he and Jennifer didn't want my money. that they didn't need my charity, that they could take care of their own daughter. I remained calm and said with complete honesty that it wasn't about them. It was about Emily, about her future, about ensuring she had the best possible opportunities to achieve her dreams. That I had financial resources available and wanted to invest in my granddaughter's future. That this didn't come with conditions or expectations of control. It was simply a genuine gift from grandmother to granddaughter. Robert was silent for a long time. Then in a slightly softer voice, I said they needed to talk about it in person. We scheduled a meeting for the following week, 3 of us, Robert, Jennifer, and me. It would be the first time seeing Jennifer since that humiliation at the party. I prepared myself mentally with the help of Dr. Patricia, who had an extra session with me days before the meeting. We met at the same cafe where I first met Emily. I deliberately chose a public place, a neutral space where everyone's behavior would be more restrained. I arrived 10 minutes early and saw the two of them arriving together. Jennifer in a casual but elegant dress, Robert in jeans and a dress shirt. The tension was palpable as we sat down. Jennifer could barely look at me, arms crossed defensively, jaw clenched. Robert looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting in his chair repeatedly. I began speaking. He said he wasn't there to relitigate the past, to shift blame, to make anyone feel bad. That what happened happened and we couldn't change it. But that Emily was my granddaughter, and regardless of all the conflicts between us adults, I wanted to be a part of her life, especially now at this crucial transition to college and adulthood. I wanted to help financially with her education without conditions, without expectations of control, simply as a gift from grandmother to granddaughter, because I had the ability to do so and because I loved her deeply. Jennifer finally spoke, her voice thick with barely contained emotion. She said they were proud, that they didn't like accepting charity from anyone, that the whole situation was extremely uncomfortable, that they still felt hurt by what happened at home, even though they logically understood that I had a legal right. I responded with equal honesty. She said I was also hurt deeply, hurt by the way I'd been treated in the previous years, by the gradual exclusion, by the lies told about me, by the public humiliation at my 15th birthday party, that we'd all done things that hurt each other, but that holding on to resentment and hurt wasn't helping anyone, especially not Emily, who was stuck in the middle, wanting a relationship with all of us. Robert placed a gentle hand on Jennifer's arm and then said something that surprised me. He said he was sorry, that looking back he could see how he'd failed me as a son, how he'd allowed the situation to escalate instead of mediating and communicating better. That Jennifer also recognized that her actions had been inappropriate at times, even if the underlying feelings were understandable. That they wanted to try to start over, not erase the past, but perhaps find a way to coexist for Emily's sake. Those words, that partial, hesitant apology, were more than I'd honestly expected. It didn't solve everything, not even close, but it was a start. We talked for over 2 hours that day, setting clearer boundaries and expectations for the future. We agreed that I would pay Emily's college tuition in full, that they would accept this help gratefully, but without feeling obligated to reciprocate in other ways. We agreed that I would have regular access to Emily, that we could meet whenever we wanted without secrets or hiding. We also agreed reluctantly on both sides to try family therapy. Jennifer especially resisted this idea, but Robert convinced her, saying they needed professional help to navigate the complexities if they truly wanted to try to rebuild something. We began sessions with Dr. Patricia a few weeks later. They were brutally difficult. Sitting in her therapy room, each had to expose deep hurts, admit mistakes, and listen to painful criticism. Robert finally verbalized how he had felt trapped between mother and wife all his life, how he had taken the easy way out by supporting Jennifer, without question, rather than trying to mediate conflict honestly. Jennifer admitted for the first time that she had been intensely jealous of my relationship with Emily. When she was a baby, that she felt threatened by my constant and competent presence. She interpreted my generous help as implicit criticism of her parenting skills, as if I were constantly telling her she wasn't good enough. I had to admit my own failure to set healthy boundaries. Early on, to use money as a way to secure love and belonging, to not clearly communicate my expectations about ownership and reimbursement. Dr. Patricia guided conversations, with a firm hand not allowing anyone to deflect or excessively blame others without acknowledging their own part. It was a painful process that took months. It didn't solve everything instantly or create perfect harmony, but it created a mutual understanding that hadn't existed before. An acknowledgement that everyone was flawed, everyone had made bad choices. Everyone had contributed to this disaster in different ways. In December of 2024, Emily received an acceptance letter from Georgia Tech with an offer of a partial merit-based scholarship. She called me crying with joy. She said it was a dream come true, that she couldn't believe it was actually happening. He asked if my offer still stood. I confirmed it immediately, and we began the process of organizing financial matters. Working with an accountant, I established an educational fund in Emily's name that would cover all expenses for her 4 years of undergraduate studies, plus potentially a master's degree if she decided to continue her studies. In total, approximately $400,000 was earmarked exclusively for her education. It was a huge sum, but I had resources after selling the house in Buckhead and making wise investments. Most importantly, it was an investment in my granddaughter's future that brought genuine joy rather than obligation or expectation of reciprocity. In June of 2025, Emily's high school graduation ceremony took place. It was the first time Robert, Jennifer, and I sat together at a family event since the whole disaster began. It was awkward, undeniably uncomfortable at times, but we were all there, united by the same purpose, celebrating Emily and her achievements. When her name was called and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma with that radiant smile that lit up her entire face, all three of us stood up, applauding with genuine pride. In that moment, looking at my beautiful, brilliant granddaughter who was about to begin a new chapter in her life, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: true peace. It wasn't perfect peace. There were still wounds that would likely never completely heal, difficult conversations that would still need to happen in the future. But it was the real beginning of healing, the possibility of rebuilding something new from the rubble of what had been destroyed. After the ceremony, we all went to dinner at an Italian restaurant Emily had chosen. She insisted I sit next to her at the table. During dinner, she raised her glass of soda and made a toast that brought tears to my eyes. She thanked her parents for the love and sacrifice they had made for her throughout her life. Then she looked directly at me with tears in her eyes and said she especially wanted to thank her grandmother, who never gave up on her, even when she was unfairly taken away, who always kept the door open waiting for the day they could reconnect. That she was eternally grateful for the second chance they were all getting to be a real family again. Today, looking back on that devastating night where I stood outside the event mansion holding a rejected gift, it feels like a completely different life. The Margaret who allowed herself to be trampled, who mistook unbridled generosity for love, who sought validation through how much money she could give, is gone. In her place is a woman who learned painful but vital lessons about self-worth, healthy boundaries, and that true love cannot be bought or forced. The emotional scars will always be there. Some will always sting when touched, but they no longer define me. I've learned that you can love people deeply and still choose to protect yourself. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or allowing destructive patterns to continue. That family sometimes needs to be completely rebuilt with more honest foundations and clearer boundaries. And that it's absolutely okay to prioritize your own emotional well-being. Emily is now thriving at Georgia Tech, calling me regularly to tell me about fascinating architectural projects she's working on, inspiring professors, and new friends she's made. I visited her campus last month, and she proudly showed me every corner. Robert and I have lunch together once a month, and our conversations, while still cautious at times, are gradually becoming deeper and more genuine. Jennifer and I will probably never be intimate, but we've achieved a tense mutual respect that works. Thomas remains a gentle and stable presence in my life, supporting me without judgment. I've built a rich and meaningful existence that doesn't depend on the approval or presence of any specific person for its value. If you're listening to this story and can relate in any way, if you've ever been treated as disposable by people you love, I want you to take this to heart. Your worth isn't determined by how much you can give to others materially. Setting firm boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential self-care. And sometimes temporarily walking away from toxic relationships is the most loving act you can do for yourself. The journey has been brutally painful, but it has made me a stronger and more complete person. If this story touched you in any way, please leave a like to help others find it and know they're not alone. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories about family overcoming and rebuilding. In the comments, I'd love to know, have you ever faced similar family conflicts involving money or property? How did you handle them? Were you able to rebuild relationships or choose to move on? Share with someone who needs to hear that there is hope even in the most devastating situations. Always remember, you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, and it's never too late to choose for yourself.